It's so interesting the way in which American folklore and our understanding of Scripture get wedded together.
I grew up totally believing that the most important thing in the universe was God and that He was very angry with me. The only anesthetic I ever got was when people applauded.
It's so interesting the way in which American folklore, that comes out of Benjamin Franklin incidentally, the way in which American folklore and our understanding of Scripture get wedded together.
How much of it is that, I mean, I'm sure there are multiple reasons. We can't pare it down to one reason, but how much of it is because the book actually is a pretty complex book. There are some difficulties reading the book. I mean, we put it in people's lap like a math book and say it's addition and subtraction, and then they open it up and it's differential equations. I mean, there's some tough stuff that gets pretty daunting in there.
I think in answer to that, there are two people who weren't Christians will respond. First would be Mark Twain, who said, "It's not the things that I don't understand about the Bible that bother me. It's the things that I do understand in the Bible that bother me." And my other favorite, even better, is W.C. Fields, who was an agnostic and on his deathbed was reading the Bible. And his wife came in and saw him reading the Bible and said, "W.C., what are you doing reading the Bible?" And he said in his interesting voice, "Looking for loopholes, my dear, looking for loopholes." You know, there's a lot in the Scripture that is very confusing. We dealt in earlier shows with some things that were really confusing. There's a lot that's really clear that we don't want to face up to.
There's as much that's convicting as confusing.
Yeah. Grace is a great loophole.
Yeah. It's not a loophole.
Well, sounds like one to me.
Yeah, well, it's
because it covers everything.
It's not a loophole.
Well, it sure is a good thing, whatever it is.
It is
because it certainly covers all my sin. And so I want to talk about the life of the beloved. And I want Stan to expound, take 10 minutes or whatever you want to take, and just tell the people there and here who they are.
You're talking about the series that I did that you heard years ago.
That changed your life.
Yes.
It changed your life.
It was one pivotal moment.
Interestingly, I was thinking when you were talking about the impact that had on you. I was, 29, 30 years old when I did that series, coming out of a highly, I don't want to use a term because terms are inflammatory, but a place where I did not get God's love. I grew up totally believing that the most important thing in the universe was God, and I believed almost like unto that He was very angry with me. I don't look back on those years and think, what was wrong with those people? Wonderful people.
Yes.
Wonderful people who love the Lord and were doing their best from where they had come from. The water that I drank had some contaminants, but it was water. And it hydrated and it saved me. And the contaminants, you spend some time detoxing from. And I don't think that's particular or peculiar to any generation. I think I'm giving my kids contaminated water, and they will have to detox from. I don't think any of us have got a corner on Jesus. So my people were doing the best, and I don't know how much of it was them, how much of it was my brain chemistry, but I ended up highly scrupulous, perfectionist, trying to earn my way with God. My people were the folk that broke off from Southeastern's people back in 1914 over a Godhead issue, and professors know who that group was, and sweet people, but highly fundamentalist. I did that series, and I suppose the effectiveness of the series, the engine probably was I was a fairly talented kid at speaking. I had the rhetoric skills, all of that stuff. The fuel for that engine was the high octane angst in my own soul. And man, you can preach some things pretty effectively when you're trying to convince yourself. One of the real embittering things for me through those years, I started preaching when I was 16. You heard that series. I remember I was out in the front yard of my house the day you called me the first time and said, "Hey, I just listened to this series. It's really impacted my life." I remember, I've never told you this, I hung up the phone, walked back in the house, and wondered for the 1,000th time how I could convince everybody else, and I still couldn't convince me. And I worked and worked and worked trying to convince myself, and finally had a pretty severe breakdown in my early 30s, and I found myself doing spiritual direction out in Arizona. And an old spiritual director out there, wonderful lady in her early 80s, I suppose, had really done a lot of work with me over a couple of weeks. I'm getting to the point of the series. And
Sure.
she, one day, and all of this sounds like such psychobabble, and it almost is tantamount to bloodletting with leeches looking back on it, but it was so used by God. She had me down on the floor on a mat, and she had a cassette player playing Sunday school songs. Oh, How He Loves You and Me, red and yellow, black and white. And she had convinced me, and this is the part that was almost sounded like bloodletting with leeches. She had convinced me that there were some wounds down in my soul that had happened to me when I was little. And she had convinced me pretty effectively that there was more to Jesus' words, that except you become as a little child, you won't see the kingdom. And that you have to heal at the point of the wound. And my intellectualizing and putting this stuff on tape could, it could bless 40-year-old Baptist, but the 6-year-old little Pentecostal boy just could not hear any of it. I need healed at a different level. And there on the floor, she was just rocking me in the arms of those old Sunday school songs. And I remember I screamed out, and she asked me just gently, she said, "What do you see?" And I said, "I'm in a hall of mirrors. And there are me everywhere." And I remember saying the word 37. I don't know if I counted them. I said, "There are 37 stands here." And the old hall of mirrors is where you are fleeing from someone, they're chasing you, you go in, they don't know which one to shoot because they don't know which one's you. And she said, "Pinch yourself." And when I pinched myself, I cried. And she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I felt glass." I didn't even know which one was me. One of the ways that I had dealt with the angst of unworthiness and shame and estrangement from God was I had tried to perform my way. Early on, I recognized that there were not enough touchdowns, home runs, A's, whatever, that could ever appease Him. But the only anesthetic that I ever got for the pain of feeling so unworthy and so lost and so hell-bound and worthless, the only anesthetic I ever got was when people applauded. And that became a powerful drug for me. The tree that grew in my backyard did not grow drugs and sex and rock and roll. We were such a particularized culture, those things, we did not have access to those trees. But I did have access to people liking me. And so very early on, I developed this ability to scan people and within 15 seconds figure out what they needed from me. And the process of subdividing myself started. It's almost a split personality. And it didn't come from any malevolence or evil. It came from me simply trying to survive. And that's why Jesus said, make peace with your enemy. I love what Brennan Manning says. When he wrote his own impostor a letter, he said, "I've cursed you my whole life for subdividing me, but I want to thank you now, because when I was 7 years old and the heavy footsteps of abuse were coming down the hall, you were the only one I had. And in the absence of good living skills, abundant life skills, you learn survival skills, and those turn into addictions. And we make them out to be these big, hairy, dirty things." And Jesus looks at the woman who's been married 5 times and living with a guy, and he says, "You don't have a problem with adultery. You're thirsty." And how do you curse at kids drinking sewage water and getting cholera when they're dying of thirst?